Welcome back in, everybody, to a Monday edition of Birds 365, coming off the Eagles bye week, getting ready for week 6 to take on the Cleveland Browns, who are looking down and out right now, not looking like a good football team. So hopefully the Eagles can take advantage and get back on track. That's John McMullen, number one Eagles beat reporter in town. Give him a follow, everybody. That's at JF McMullen. I'm your host, Zander Krause. Give me a follow at Real Zander. Appreciate everybody in the chat. Hit that like button on the show if you're enjoying the show. John, I want to talk about Nick Sirianni. He's a guy that's been in the bullseye the last couple of weeks. You've tempered, some of my disappointment with him. Your thoughts on Dan Orlovsky comes out, and he says this is a poorly coached football team, and I quote that, a poorly coached football team. And he even went as far as to label Jalen Hurts a liability on offense. And he didn't just do that in a vacuum, by the way, with Jalen. He said since, he was an MVP type player in the Super Bowl, he's regressed into becoming a liability, and he says, watch their tape. Number one, since the start of 23, has anyone gotten better on the team? I think Dan Orlovsky has a good point here about Nick Sirianni. Your thoughts on that and where we are with Nick Sirianni going into week 6?
Overreaction. I love Dan, by the way, for those who don't know. Sometimes I think he's too smart to think that. So sometimes I think it's part of his job, unfortunately. So I was kind of describing earlier. Engagement. I mean, think about what you're saying. And this is why I have too much respect for Dan to think he believes that, but he's got a high paying job and everybody, that's what it is. That's what you do in today's world, unfortunately. Because when you say, what does Nick Sirianni do? Like, I bet if you got Dan in a room, even on television, and asked him, like, what does that mean? Like, Vic Fangio's coaching on this team, and we talk about his reputation all the time. Jeff Stoutland is coaching on this team. What happened to Jeff Stoutland? What has Nick Sirianni done to stem the tide of Jeff Stoutland? Kellen Moore and the respect that he gets. Doug Nussmeier and his long-term history. Jason Michael's been an offensive coordinator in this league. Clint Hurt, who's been a defensive coordinator. All these assistant coaches who are, by every objective measure, really good at what they do. And Nick Sirianni stymies that somehow by doing what? I mean, you got half of the people, again, I point out the hypocrisy of this. Well, what does he do? Evidently, he destroys the credibility of Vic Fangio and Jeff Stoutland. I mean, the overriding sentiment behind that is absurd on its surface. Is this team not playing well? Yes. Then the second part, and I talked about this with Mike Gill, our buddy, last week. Nobody has progressed. Really? I mean, that's absurd on its surface. Jordan, look at the offensive line to talk about Jeff Stoutland. Landon Dickerson's developed into an all-pro level player. Jordan Mailata keeps getting better and better and better and better. Cam Jurgens has been unbelievable as a year one starter. Dallas Goedert just had a career game. Quinyon Mitchell is one of the best rookies in the NFL as a young player. Zach Bond was a nothing, and now he's turning into a playmaker that has, needs some consistency. Reed Blankenship's one of the best stories in the NFL, never mind the Philadelphia Eagles. Dumb. It's a dumb statement. It's a dumb statement, and it speaks to the dumbing down of sports media, because evidently that's what people like. Overreaction and dumb shit.
Well, I understand your point of view, and I think it's well taken, but I will say this. In the last 11 games, John, the Eagles are 3-8. And this is obviously a roster that gets talked about both locally and nationally as like one of the best rosters in the NFL. Howie Roseman give him his flowers, the greatest GM since sliced bread. I mean, that's the talking around the team. And when you look at the body of work in the last 11 games, it's ugly. And I'm not saying you can only take 11 games. I understand it's cherry picking the collapse, in this year. So you can't leave out the 10-1 start last year, but they're 3-8 in the last 11 games. Jalen Hurts looks like he almost like a shell of himself from that MVP form. And that's the two things, John, you know it better than anybody. The coach and the quarterback, man. That's what people judge.
Yeah, but I'm answering the question. The question is they're a poorly coached team. And I said, what does that mean? And nobody's progressed,
Well,
which
3
is
and 8 in the last 11.
which is blatantly false. Have they played well? No, that's a different conversation. Have they played up to other people's expectations? Absolutely not. And part of that reason is because the roster you talked about is overrated. It's very top heavy.
Yeah.
And the depth is not there, which is more on Howie. But again, to the point of the question is, what happened to Vic Fangio? What happened to Kellen Moore? What happened to Jeff Stoutland? It's that's the question I was answering. What Cam Jurgens hasn't progressed. Jordan Mailata hasn't progressed.
Well, that's a lot of offensive linemen. I don't know if people just don't give Nick credit for that, John. Right or wrong, they don't.
Yeah. Reed Blank, well, they're giving him credit for everything they want to blame, and they're not giving him credit for anything else. I'm not the one who said no player is progressing. Again, I also brought up Reed Blankenship. I also brought up Zach Bond. I also brought up Quinyon Mitchell, but those are defensive players, so nobody wants to give him credit there. The offensive
do you think
players,
he deserves credit for them?
Nobody deserves. Well, he's the head coach. I'm answering the question you asked me. Are they poorly coached? Are nobody has progressed? That's what Dan said. That is absurd on its surface. Unless you want to agree that those guys didn't progress, or if you want to agree that Jeff Stoutland and Vic Fangio and everybody else I mentioned can't coach. If you want to agree with that, all right. But those two statements were the questions I was answering. That does not mean the Eagles have played well over the last 11 games. That does not mean the quarterback hasn't regressed. But if that's what you want to say it. Don't expand that into, oh, they're poorly coached, which is low-hanging fruit, and nobody's progressed when a bunch of players have progressed pretty significantly, to be honest. The fact that a bunch of them are on the offensive line speaks to Stoutland and the point of, oh, they're poorly coached, except for Jeff Stoutland, except for Vic Fangio, except for Clint Hurt, except for et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Again, if he said they have a bad head coach, if that's what he said, you can make that argument. Is he a great head coach? I don't think so. Is he a bad head coach? I don't think so. He's in the middle like most of the people.
Has he been bad in the last 11 games?
Well, they've had a bad stretch of football.
Yeah, but doesn't some of that reflect on the coach?
Of course.
Yeah.
But this year versus last year, like this year, I don't think it's been that bad from the standpoint of, again, the injuries. And if they're out there, if those three players are out there, you're not having a lot of these conversations. And those three players are going to be out there after the bye. And then we're going to be back into nitpicking mode, as I said, offensively. Defensively, it was always going to be a growing process. And you're going to have some ebbs and flows. And there's been some good games and some bad games, and that'll probably continue. But I don't think you're going to see 1-6. So in a lot of ways, last year's collapse, which is what really everybody's focused on, doesn't have much to do with the 2-2 start this year, which I think would probably be 3-1 if they were healthy. So that's not that bad. you point out Jeffrey Lurie made his decision on the collapse, and I think he made a bad decision. And by that, I'm talking about the setup. But he made his decision on the collapse. I'm talking about this season. And I know everybody wants to go back to last season, but as I just talked about with the Washington Commanders, there's tremendous changeover and significant changeover in the NFL every season. So Big Fangio has nothing to do with Sean Desai other than he taught him back in the day. Kellen Moore has nothing to do with Brian Johnson, etc. Players, Zach Bond wasn't on this team. Bryce Hupp wasn't on this team.
But
Quinyon
it's not an
Mitchell.
entirely new regime, so you can't split it. Like the head of the horse is still here. I get what you're saying. Vic Fangio shouldn't be responsible for what happened last year, nor should Kellen Moore on offense. But Nick is still here, and that's what people are going to analyze is the full body of
Well,
work.
I don't care what people analyze. Dan should know better. Dan should know better.
So you think he's completely wrong in saying, that Nick hasn't?
Not only do I think he's completely wrong with what he said, I don't even think he believes what he said.
So you don't think there's any sort of coaching problem right now in Philly?
That's not what I said.
Well, he's saying there's a coaching issue.
He said, "What?
All right, okay. You're disputing the point about the players getting better. I understand that. What about the coach?
The head coach?
The head coach of the football team, Nick Sirianni.
The head coach is the same head coach he's been. Are people starting to perhaps tune him out? I could see that. I don't think he was, and I would have gotten killed for this. I don't think he was a top 5 coach when people thought he was a top 5 coach. I think he's a middle of the road NFL coach. I think he was before when they were winning all those games. And I think he was now that they're having a little bit of a difficult stretch. I don't think he's great. I don't think he's terrible. Now, does that, he's admitted, by the way, publicly that, and most people admit that when you first become a head coach in this league, you don't realize what it encompasses. And that's when he scaled back from calling plays to giving it to Shane Steichen. And became more of a CEO coach, which some people believe didn't happen until this year for whatever reason. He was already a CEO coach. So, look, again, unfortunately, that's where we are in media, and people say things because they have to say things for engagement. And I don't believe Dan believes what he said, because I know damn well he respects Big Fangio. And I know damn well he respects Jeff Stoutland. So what do you say? You say, oh, they're terribly coached. Oh, nobody has progressed because the quarterback hasn't progressed. That's low-hanging fruit. The quarterback, say it. The quarterback hasn't progressed.
Well, that was my next
Jurgens has. Jordan Mailata has.
That was my next question, John. Since Jalen Hurts got his big contract, which was after the Super Bowl year in 22, have you seen any progression from him? And I'm asking you, I'm not asking Dan Orlovsky for his. I'm asking you, do you believe Jalen Hurts has gotten better since he signed that contract, or has he gotten worse?
No, he's clearly gotten worse. Clearly. It's not even close. He was a runner-up MVP. To the MVP. And he was arguably the best player on the field in the biggest game. And I don't see any of that. So, again, it's not just quarterback playing by himself. It has to do partially with the supporting cast, losing the play caller, overcoming that. Now you have more upheaval with another play caller, yada, yada, yada. But the things you would like to see evolution on, I don't think have dramatically increased to the point where you feel comfortable. Clearly, the turnover issue is in his head. There's a lot of regression from a quarterback standpoint from where he was
Right.
to where he is now. And that's disappointing.
Do you
But
believe any of that should fall on the head coach?
sure. I mean, there's two ways. The head coach is responsible for everything. So
Right.
you
So
can
it
blame any
naturally
that
falls.
in many ways that's Nick's job description. I said to be the lightning rod. So of course, and he's the first one to say his name is on everything related to the Philadelphia Eagles. So blame him first. He constantly says it. So, but is he working with Jalen on a
Right.
daily basis?
In the
No,
micro, it's not really on Nick.
no, no, and it hasn't been for really. If you think about the guys who work closely day to day, you know, that's the quarterback's coach. So when it was Brian Johnson, and then the offensive coordinator was Shane Steichen, and then the head coach Nick Sirianni. 1, 2, 3. The guy who worked daily with him is Brian Johnson. When Brian got promoted, it was Alex Tanney, and then Brian Johnson, and then Nick Sirianni. Now it's Doug Nussmeier, who in a lot of ways is the most important one of them all, as Brian was in the past and as Alex was. And Alex probably wasn't ready as a very young coach, basically straight off the field. So, Doug Nussmeier's been doing this for a long time. And he's one of those guys who's got a tremendous amount of respect around the league. So I'm always gonna go talent first. I say it all the time on this show. I'm always gonna blame the player first. And then look at the coaching and what's going on with the coaching. But with Alex Tanney, I could see it because, as I said, I mean, Doug's been around forever. He's played the position. He played it at a high level, was a great college quarterback, was a backup in the NFL for years, and has been coaching quarterbacks basically since he got out. So he's like Alex Tanney plus 20 years of experience. Seen it all, I'll look him up. He was a quarterback's coach with the St. Louis Rams, and a bunch of college stops. You got, and by the way, think about where he was in college: Washington, Alabama, Michigan, Florida, and then obviously Cowboys, Chargers, where he hooked up with Kellen Moore. But I mean, so you don't have the Alex Tanney excuse anymore. Like at some point, people jump on their sword for the players.
Yeah,
I
no,
always
I get
say,
it.
you got to look at the player first.
Yeah, well, I said on Friday's show, and I don't think it was on this show. I think it was on the afternoon show. I said, hey, how many coordinators are we going to go through, before we turn our sights onto the quarterback? It's Nick and it's Brian Johnson was the scapegoat, who now looks like he's doing a pretty good job with Jaden Daniels again. So we'll see. I mean, look, I think much of the conversation around this football team relies on the quarterback, and that goes for the coach too. I think if the quarterback was playing great, everybody would say Nick Sirianni's great. But he's not playing good. So a lot of it does come down on Jalen. He's got to be better. That's the bottom line. And he's the only one I think capable of completely changing the narrative, John.
Yeah. He's got to play better.
Yeah.
And he's going to have the opportunity to play better because AJ's going to be out there. Devontae's going to be out there. Now we're back to, all right, if you're Jim Schwartz, what do you do? What's your game plan? Who do you want to stop? And if it's not them, it could be Dallas. It could be Saquon. What do you do? Pick your poison. And if this group is healthy for the rest of the season, you talked about 13 weeks consecutively. If this group is healthy for the rest of the regular season, and this is not a top 5 offense, don't blame Kellen Moore. Don't blame Nick Sirianni. Don't blame Doug Nussmeier. Blame Jalen Hurts.
Fair enough. I will blame him if that happens for sure. I've been hard on Jalen, in this year, and I've gotten a lot of shit. It's funny how people now somebody in the chat saying I'm giving Hurts a pass. I've been pretty hard on Jalen this year, everybody. But all right, no worries. Appreciate everybody. Got one super chat I'm going to get to. Brian Fleming checks in. Sorry, I'm late to join, Xander. That's all right, Brian. Appreciate you being here, brother. He says, when are we getting an FU Brandon shirt in the merch store? One of my favorite moments ever on Jacob Brian. I'm not sure if we'll print that shirt, but that was a good moment last week. Appreciate the super chat, Brian. John, just 7 minutes left here on the show. I'll ask you what I asked Jeff Kerr. Will the Eagles get right this week? You have them going. Well, I don't want to speak for you, but you insinuated they could go 3-1 in their next 4. They got 3 in their last 11 right now. That's you're banking on a big change in the tide, Johnny Mac. I'll tell you that.
Well, I'm not I don't look at them. I don't think in the NFL, I don't think one season has anything to do with the other.
So you're cutting
there's
off that.
there's some consistency, obviously, when you have a big time quarterback, and you can garner that stage which the Eagles had for a long stretch, where you are consistent as a team. That's out the window. But I do think a lot of the struggles early, and certainly all of the struggles offensively, can be traced by missing, in Tampa, missing your 3 top players, and before that, missing your top player. I think a lot of that can be explained by those injuries. And defensively, it's a work in progress where I thought it would be. The only thing missing is the pass rush. I did not think the pass rush would be this inept. I don't think anybody did. And that's got to get better. I mean, my if you want to call it optimism, besides the health of those 3 particular players who are all difference makers, significant difference makers, it's the opponents.
Right. You get arguably 2 bottom 5 teams coming up.
Yeah, Cleveland, and you can make an argument for 3, to be honest. Right now, I think the Giants are better than Cleveland, which is frightening.
Yeah.
And maybe Jim will figure things out.
And then you got the Jaguars as a bottom 3? Or bottom
yeah, I mean,
5,
well, they were the last winless team before they won, and they barely beat Indy.
Yeah.
Which isn't, is playing Joe Flacco. So, the only, and ironically, the best team is 1-4 over the next 4 weeks. So, again, there are no Vandy's, and Vandy's no longer Vandy. Sorry to pick at a sore spot, but there are no Vandy's.
I haven't heard John mention a college football game in 4 years, everybody. And there it goes. He starts poking at me with that one.
That's not true. I bring up, and because Alabama's so good. But by the way, Alabama should have been prepared for this, because you can't replace Nick Saban.
No,
with
I was prepared, John. I promise you, I was prepared.
Well, I don't know about Vandy.
I drank the Kool-Aid after they beat up on Georgia for sure.
I didn't expect him to lose to Vandy, but I mean, you're not replacing Nick Saban with some run of the mill. That ain't happening. But I digress. I mean, the NFL is always tough. Everybody can beat you, but this 4-week stretch is about as easy as it's gonna get. So you better take advantage of it.
Yeah, we'll see how the Eagles do. They got to answer the bell this week. 2-2 right now, coming off the bye week. They're looking at the Browns on Sunday. Then they have the Giants in New York. That'll be not the 2 Sundays from now. And then they have the Bengals in Cincinnati, and then the Jaguars at home on Sunday night. So an interesting 4 games, as John pointed out. 3 of those teams really stink. All of them stink from a record standpoint. I mean, the Bengals are 1-4. I don't think the Bengals are a 1-4 team. And you got to
No.
take him seriously when they have Joe Burrow playing. I mean, he threw 5 touchdowns yesterday, so he's finding
The
his
New York
rhythm.
Giants had the best record of that group.
Oh my God, is that funny? That is funny. So that you are looking at a gauntlet of 4 games, not a gauntlet. What's the John? What's the opposite of a gauntlet? You're a smart guy. What's the opposite of a gauntlet?
The murderer's row, something of that nature.
No, that would be tough, wouldn't it? Wouldn't a murderer's row be tough? This is the opposite of that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The opposite. Oh, I see.
I'm saying, what's easy? What's a cupcake walk?
Yeah, why not? We'll call it a bunch of cupcakes.
Yeah.
They're what it was. So 1-4, 1-4, 1-4 is 3-12 plus 2-3, 5-16. If I'm doing the math correctly.
Yeah, 5.
That's your next 4 weeks for your fella. I mean, again, you saw the Giants. Nobody's predicting the Giants to go into Seattle and beat Seattle, and they did. Things happen in the NFL, but it's not going to get easier than this 4 weeks. So if they're disappointing in these next 4 weeks, by all means, press the panic button. But boy, I think AJ could beat 2 of these teams by himself.
Well, no update on him yet, right?
No, he'll be back. He's going to play. He
should be
could have
back,
played.
right?
I think he would have played last week if the bye wasn't coming up. If that were a playoff game, he would have played.
He would have played. Got it. And then I guess we'll get the update too on Devontae Smith and Lane Johnson as well, who both of them should be back, but not sure. But the concussion, as you pointed out, it's tough to know, who's where and how it all works because the league kind of has control of it. So we'll get the update. John, you going down to NovaCare today, or no? You're not going down.
Not till Wednesday projected, but again, scheduled this week yet, so most likely not till Wednesday. Most likely.
So we'll get some more updates on Thursday's show on Birds 365 once John is down there, and we'll obviously be keeping a close eye. Any press conferences over the phone today, or no?
No, we have we're going to have a talk about the PFWA is trying to ban reporters from the locker room. So I got to deal with some of that today. Not going to happen. We're not going to be banned from the locker room, but
well, I know because me and you texted off the air a little bit about it. I did see that. Would that affect you, or would it not affect you personally?
No, it's not going to. If anything, they're going to remove cameras,
right.
And that'll actually be better for me.
You talk about that a lot, yeah.
Yeah. So no, it's not gonna be. And some players want to take interviews in other cities. Nobody with the Eagles, by the way, has mentioned any of this at this point, but players in other cities want to take interviews out of the locker room, which they've always had the ability to do so. If a reporter wants to talk to you and you say, hey, let's go outside, that was part of the policy to begin with. So nothing as far as the actual media policy with the NFL has changed. Just some players uncomfortable with cameras in the locker room, which I don't blame them. And I'd like to ban TV cameras as well.
Yeah, so we'll see how that.
But I can't.
We'll see how it all plays out. Appreciate everybody being here in the chat today. Quan Pugh, what's up, Quan? I hope you're doing well. Shooter McGavin, Dank Bird Gang, Kev, DRM Reyes. Appreciate all you guys, man. Daz is in here. Sinful World. Appreciate everybody in the chat. Hit that like button on your way out if you enjoyed the show today. I thought we had a good conversation with Jeff Kerr. He froze up a little bit at the end, which is always unfortunate, but his audio still works, so we can hear him well. But good stuff today, John. Great show today, man. We'll talk to you tomorrow morning on Birds 365.